Hi, I'm August Keller, and this is my review of Alien Romulus. So let's start with the story. I think the writing's pretty middling. Good and bad are kind of almost cancel each other out. The plot is a retread of the first Alien movie, but it's kind of diluted by these convoluted choices that I think are trying to make it more unique, but I don't know. It just kind of comes across like the same story with just diluted. The call to adventure is a little confusing. I mean, it makes sense on a core level. It's very relatable. These characters want to escape poverty, but once we start getting to the specifics of how they're going to escape that poverty and like what they're actually trying to do, it gets convoluted. It's more trouble than it's worth. There is another conspiracy reveal, which seems to be typical with this franchise, and this one feels unnecessary and just a little silly. And there's also a lot of distracting fan service. It's just like these strenuous connections to previous films that just kind of take away from this film being from the story of this film. It kind of pauses here and there to remind people of other movies that this movie is related to. It can just be a movie, It doesn't need to remind us of other movies. There is a saucy finale that I think seems to be getting a lot of reactions out of people, but I honestly found it to just be a slight variation of established franchise ingredients. It just kind of shuffles some things around, and I didn't feel too strongly one way or another about it. It just kind of fell in line with being a retread, in my opinion, just like slightly varied. Any themes that are in this movie feel like kind of like incidental echoes, like, because we're retreading the plot, we're going to retread these themes. They're just going to kind of come along with it. And it doesn't really feel like it's trying to say anything. It's just kind of saying them because the other movies have said it. The dialogue has its stilted moments. A lot of side characters are completely stagnant. They set them up, but then it doesn't really go anywhere. And they're just kind of fodder for the action. There's very little resolution. There's resolution, but minimally so. And the homages are pretty excessive to the point where it starts to feel like an imitation of the first movie. Again, it's okay to just be a movie. It can be an alien movie in the Alien franchise without constantly reminding us of that. So that's a lot of negatives, but the positive that really holds everything together is the central relationship between the two protagonists. I really felt like that worked, and it's a pretty important piece of the puzzle, and I kept finding myself going back to that and caring about that. The two main characters have motivation. There becomes a conflict between them and an internal conflict within the two of them because of that conflict between them. And they grow. They both grow. And the acting really reflects this. Spaeny is very vulnerable and relatable. I don't know how to say his name. Jonsson. He has a lot of range. He's playing like multiple characters within the same person. And he has like this very interesting mannerisms and speech patterns that are pretty flashy as an actor, but also not over the top. It's very noticeable, but fitting. And the two of them together have a lot of chemistry. So that really holds the movie together, holds the movie down, and keeps the movie from feeling completely hollow, because that at least is something that the movie is doing that's new of its own and feels genuine. So even though it's primarily stale and pretty shallow, Romulus lands adequate heart. to make the story acceptable. Technically, I think Romulus is a bit better on the technical front. It's got really good atmosphere, but that atmosphere is kind of weakened by what I found to be repetitive tones and set pieces. The tone really kind of sticks to one note where it's just kind of, there's like suspense, but it's not ever so suspenseful that it feels exciting, and it never really takes a break from that suspense to, have quieter moments. It's just kind of always dully tense. And the set pieces feel pretty repetitive, and I felt kind of lacked creativity. There's a scene where the characters have to navigate what is essentially a minefield, and I was really excited for that to see how they handle it. I was thinking it might be reminiscent of something like the original Mission Impossible, where it's really about them being precise and careful, and it's really suspenseful. Where where Tom Cruise is like hovering over the floor. But the set piece that I'm talking about doesn't really do much. It just kind of does it for a little bit, and then it's over, and we move on. And it didn't really sweep me away for any amount of time. I was really excited once it got going, and then once it happened, I was like a little disappointed. So anyways, the cinematography is very beautifully lit. There's focus and framing, and even some composition, like frames within frames. But I did find it to get a little drab and murky. The color palette is fittingly bleak, but there are times where it really just kind of becomes ugly. It just kind of dips into that too dark, too gray, too brown, and it's not pretty anymore. Despite its respectable pacing and decent runtime, the editing has kind of this uneven structure. Like I said, there's little resolution, and it kind of doesn't have a clear climax, where there's a couple points where it kind of feels like it's a climax. Did that previous climax end? Are we into a new climax? And the momentum kind of fizzles because of that. There's just not enough going on for viewers to care about for the momentum to keep refreshing. So it starts off with good momentum and just kind of dissipates. The sound has a lot of genre elements. There's a lot of good use of silence, where it's like contrasting action with outer space. There's like subjective distortions, like muffling. There are stings. Some I felt a little unnecessary, but mostly fine. And there's a voiceover at the end, which I found questionable. Did we need it? But at the very least, the sound design is complex. The cast has rising talent and good diversity. I wouldn't say it's a deep cast. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a lot of star power, or even any star power yet. But I'm a fan of Spaeny, and I'm becoming a fan of Jonsson between this and Ridley. The effects are extensive, and I was surprised to see how tangible and practical they were. But that is undermined by a very central character being Uncanny Valley. I just can't stand that, and I have to knock the effects at least a point for that, because it's so, I have to see that Uncanny Valley face so much. The music is very moody. It's got elegance, it's got ominousness, it's industrial to a certain extent. But it's always secondary. It never really overtakes a scene or pushes a scene to a higher level. It's just meeting the scene. The production design has, dystopian sci-fi world building. There's a lot of analog technology, which I was a big fan of. That was maybe one of my favorite parts of the movie, is how they kept it analog instead of digital technology. And there's an interesting new creature that I'm sure people are going to talk about, but I didn't find it particularly original. Again, it's just kind of remixing all the ingredients that the franchise has already established. So ultimately, I found Romulus functional. It does a good job, an okay job. And, like I said, there are things about it I like. And in general, it doesn't have any massive negatives, just a lot of things that are mediocre to it. So, all that is to say, it's a fine movie. I was never mad at it. I think I respect it a little more than I liked it. I think I am ultimately indifferent towards it. But it's a fine movie. Okay, so I guess that's all I have to say about that. If you like what I'm doing here, please feel free to like and subscribe. But at the very least, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks. Bye.